Welcome into a very special episode of the NFL Brekkie Show. As we make our season return, well, half of us do. Phil Murphy will be back in the big chair next week as we give you our Week 0 preview to the 2024 season. But this week isn't about Week 0. It's not about Week 5. It's not a quarter poll, a half poll, a three-quarter poll. It is draft week. It is fantasy football nirvana that we are entering. And who better to help us carve through the madness that is the world of fantasy football than the illustrious, the fantasy phenom herself, Liz Loza, joining us all the way from the West Coast in the United States. Liz, thank you for giving us a bit of time in this holy week of all weeks.
Oh my gosh, Laurie, what a rousing introduction. It was so good I had to stumble. My goodness, was taking my breath. Thank you so much. And yes, what an exciting time to be drafting. We are just 1 week away from official NFL action, which means we have very little time to get our fantasy rosters in order.
Absolutely. This weekend coming up, it's Friday here. I know it's Thursday over there in LA, but we are getting into the biggest draft weekend of the year. I know I've got a home league tonight. I've got a home league tomorrow. I have Father's Day on the Sunday. So a very interesting conversation with my dearly supportive, very loving and very patient, generous wife. But this is a huge weekend. This is what people have been gearing up for. Look, draft day for your fantasy league, for your home league, especially if you're doing it in person, it's the best day of the year. So we're going to try and help you navigate through the early pitfalls, some hidden gems. Now, full confession, I am a 5-time fantasy runner-up in my home league. Lost the title 5 times. We talked about this last year. Tried some manifesting, tried some visualization, had some good last week results. It created a bit of a miraculous chain of dominoes that got me into the playoffs. I wasn't able to step up, though, after that. So there were some steps taken. But I am a master of fantasy heartbreak. So I'm here to tell you maybe a couple things what not to do because I've made all the mistakes. And Liz is obviously here to guide you into some smarter decisions with her expertise and nous. But I want to kick it off right from the top because people, there's an old cliche and where how true it is we can get into. But they say you can't win your fantasy league in the first couple rounds, but you can lose it. So what are some early round hurdles for some players going in that? Maybe they're the top 5 at that position. That was a specific question we had coming in from Nick, a top 5 player at any one of those positions. And I guess in the first couple of rounds, we're really looking at running back and wide receiver if we're talking top 5. But some of those early names in that top 20, 25 range overall that you're steering clear of because you think they could be a key to fantasy heartbreak in 2024.
Well, I have to be honest, Rachaad White is screaming to me as being overvalued. I understand why people are looking at last year's production and wanting to replicate that this go around. He was the RB4 overall in fantasy last year, and that was largely due to his 20 touches per game. Now, as a rusher, horribly inefficient. Did not do particularly well in a yards per carry point of view. As a receiver, much better. I believe he was the RB5 overall, managing 8.6 yards per reception, 3.6 yards per carry, RB35 on the ground as a rusher. Now, unfortunately, I think he's going to get more rushing opportunities than receiving opportunities because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have brought in a 4th-round rookie named Bucky Irving out of Oregon, and Irving has really shined during camp, particularly as a pass catcher. So I don't think that White is going to see those 20 touches per game. And if he does see more volume, it's going to be the kind of volume that he doesn't excel at. So to me, White is a bust where he's going right now.
Yeah, if you're not familiar with Bucky Irving, there's certainly some joystick potential the way he plays the game. Go check out his college highlights or what he's done early in preseason. But there's a lot of fun there with Bucky Irving. And it's that efficiency question. It is just how much someone like Rachaad White, who it was his season result was so heavily slanted, like you said, to one area of the game. As anyone who watched, if you got the cut-ups for just the rushing attempts for that Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense last year, that'd put you to sleep pretty quickly. That was a tough watch. That was a tough grind. We know you do that, though. We know that you're in there grinding the tape, grinding the numbers. Another name that's been brought up, and this is the People's Show, so we are absolutely involved. We've had a flood of questions coming in ahead of your illustrious visit today to shine fantasy knowledge on us. And another one in this range was Davante Adams, kind of going in that late round 2, round 3 range, depending if you're, half PPR, no PPR, point per first down, full PPR, if that's how you roll. But in that range, Davante Adams with the questions at quarterback, Gardner Minshew getting the early nod, Aiden O'Connell behind him. that offensive line does not leave you with a lot of, solid feelings about offensive stability. Where do you land on the former Green Bay Packer, someone who has been the key to many a fantasy championship over the years, but so many question marks about his current situation now in Las Vegas, and perhaps where he finds himself playing maybe before that trade deadline hits in November?
Oh, I love that tease, and I would bet that Davante Adams' representation also would appreciate that tease. Listen, before I get into this, can we all agree that Davante Adams still, at age 31, has the best release in the game? He's
At age
still an
35, I
incredibly
agree.
talented player. All right. So this is not a knock on the player's skill set or the player's evolution or even hinting, whispering that the player might be washed. However, his situation sucks for fantasy. I do expect him to clear 1,000 receiving yards for the 5th straight season, by the way, because who's going to get all these looks? If you are Luke Getsy, and I'm a Bears fan, so I've had enough of him. Now Las Vegas has him. But if you're him, who else are you going to have your Gardner Minshew or AOC target? It's going to be Davante Adams. So he is going to get a lot of volume. He drew 175 targets last year. Here's the asterisk. Only 117 of them were deemed catchable. That is a catchable target rate of under 67%. Catchable target rate, not conversion rate. So I don't expect Davante Adams to be terribly efficient in this offense. But forgetting all that for a moment, just larger picture draft strategy, there is so much veteran value in the back half of drafts this year that just from a chess playing strategic POV, you don't need to draft Davante Adams because you have players like Malik Neighbors, like Marvin Harrison Jr. You have these higher upside dart throws that can be insured/covered with a ton of veteran value. Chris Godwin, Terry McLaurin, Deontay Johnson, all later in drafts. So there isn't any real need to rely on Adams' 1,000 receiving yards, unless, of course, he falls drastically, and now you're looking at him as a value instead of paying peak price for him.
Well, I hope that everybody out there is enjoying the fantasy gold, the nuggets of wisdom that are starting to be shared on this show today. I do hope that members of my league, I hope you're watching on delay, maybe tomorrow, maybe your internet got cut for just a little bit and you missed all of that because we're definitely seeing some targets that I've got written down in my notepad being brought up already. Okay, moving on. That's the early part. We've talked about some early hurdles. Now we're going to move our way through the draft as we go, and you've already dropped a couple of really interesting names that last year we talked a lot about the running back dead zone, kind of in that, does it start in the late 3rd round, early 4th round, carry through kind of round 7-ish, where those kind of questionable workload, familiar name running backs come off the board as people kind of try and paint by numbers and I really need to grab a second running back here, or really want a running back in my flex, but I'm going to grab someone here that perhaps I don't have a lot of conviction about. Is the running back dead zone back and not alive, but back and dead in 2024? Or has that part of the draft kind of evened out a little bit? Are you feeling that it's a little more of a profitable area to go and dip and take yourself a rusher?
Well, I will say that there are a load, just like I just mentioned, a load of veteran wide receiver talent in the back half. Late dart throws at running back are massive. There's been an infusion of young talent and so many RBBCs now that there are players like, I love Jalen Wright. Is he going to see a touch in week 1? I don't know. But will he when, Raheem Mostert, who's 32 years old, gets hurt, or Devon Achane, whatever we're calling him these days, when he inevitably has a soft tissue issue or a knee tweak? That's someone that, dart throw wise, there's so many of those guys. Ty Chandler, Trey Benson, Zach Charbonnet, Ray Davis, who I think, if we're going to little nug looking into week 1, I am very interested to see what Ray Davis can do in week 1. I'm not going to start him, but that is a player to watch. So there's a glut, if you will, of incredible dart throw talent late. However, at the top of the draft, not nearly as much. So I personally have not been going zero RB this season. I've been going much more anchor/hero RB. If I can get in my first 3 picks, or if I'm picking at the 5 spot and There is still a Breece Hall or a Bijan Robinson, assuming CMC went number 1 overall, avail to me. I am taking him. There's a Jonathan Taylor who I think has tremendous first, second round, depending on the size of your league appeal. Yes, I know you're fanning yourself in that Anthony Richardson offense, opening up lanes, come back healthy. We like Saquon Barkley working behind the best offensive line that he's ever seen in his career with a little bit of a chip on his shoulder. There's some Derrick Henry massive touchdown appeal. Isaiah Pacheco is a player that I am drafting everywhere. If I am drafting, after the 5 spot in the first round, I am usually targeting Amon-Ra St. Brown and then getting Isaiah Pacheco on the turn in the second round. And then after those guys, Travis Etienne, another one, top 10 producer, I think. So of those guys, first 1 or 2 rounds, I like that grouping of running backs. I want a running back coming out of my second round at least. And then you're right, around rounds 5, 6, 7, it gets a little bit murky, but I do think you have to take a guy in that area. One that I've been targeting a lot because I think there's great comeback potential is Javonte Williams. He's currently the RB28 coming off of boards. I think he's going to touch the ball upwards of 15 times per game. That doesn't mean that I'm not eyeing Jaleel McLaughlin again super late, but I think that Javonte Williams has comeback appeal. There's Aaron Jones, who it's nerve-wracking, but could have later round value, could use one of these Ramondre Stevenson, these guys who are in this like 7th round as an RB2, and then you wait and hammer with your dart throws really late once we're getting into like rounds 9 and beyond.
Well, when you look at some of those names you mentioned there, whether it was Jalen Wright off the top, and we had our ESPN draft just the other day, and I waited on a running back too, and Raheem Mostert was there sliding. But at that value point, if you're someone that likes a dart throw but likes a little insurance built in there, at the cost they're going for, you can grab a Raheem Mostert, and if your bench is deep enough, grab Wright later and figure, hey, in one way or another, I'm going to get half of this Miami Dolphins backfield, because we know with guys like Devon Achane, or you mentioned Ray Davis, with guys like James Cook, at the top of their depth chart on these high-powered offenses, but these aren't guys who are expecting to take the whole load. This isn't load them up with 25 carries and 5 targets in the passing game. These guys have a limited workload potential on the ground, so you know that with those running backs by committee that you mentioned, if you're going to grab in some way, one way or another, you're going to wind up with half of that from one of these top-end offenses that we've seen the big plays from. It makes a bunch of sense. 2 things are happening live as we're talking right now. One of 2 things, I should say. Either my fantasy drought is about to end because I'm in lockstep with everything that you're being thrown down so far, or your picks are in trouble because you're in lockstep with me. We will see as the season plays out. Hopefully it's just because I've been listening to you and getting rid of my own fantasy heartaches and the strategies that led me down a bad path in seasons prior. Okay, moving on.
Let me throw out one more name. Hold on, I don't want to. One more name, Blake Corum. I really like Blake Corum. I do expect Kyren Williams to start the season. I don't want to hear about punt returns. He had a ton of punt returns weeks 1 through 3 last season as well. Actually, this is something Daniel Dopp does to me. I'm going to do it to you, Laurie. You know who loves Kyren Williams?
Who?
It doesn't matter. Sean McVay loves Kyren Williams. And so, yes, he will start the season. And also, who doesn't love Kyren Williams? His own feet do not love him. Which is why Blake Corum was drafted in the 3rd round as insurance. And if the LA Rams use their first offensive pick in the draft, the first 2 rounds they chose defense, to ensure that backfield, a Sean McVay schemed backfield, by the way, then I think fantasy managers might want to take a note. Even if you don't draft Kyren Williams, get Corum, because eventually he will be a great trade piece for the Williams owner.
Absolutely. And that offensive line in Los Angeles, I know there's been some health in preseason, but they have the biggest, burliest, and one of the most talented interiors of the offensive line assembled now with what they did in free agency and with Steve Avia there. Steve Avia, who I was very lucky to get to have a chat to, which will be coming up on ESPN Australia's social channels and YouTube and website soon enough. A lovely man with a pretty decent Australian accent. So all the more reasons to get around Blake Corum late, knowing the potential for his value either on your team or as trade bait later in the season. All right, while we're on rookies, I want to touch on these rookie wide receivers. You mentioned a couple already. Marv Harrison, is that what we're going with? Not sure about that. We've got Marv Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors. Marv Harrison Jr. going around wide receiver 10, ADP on ESPN. Malik Neighbors in the mid-20s. Roma Dunze, another person I got to have a little chat with there. I know that might be a bit of jealousy there, given that you're a big Bears fan. Hallis Hall, great place to visit. You'll see more of that content. Look at these content plugs coming up throughout the season. Roma Dunze around the wide receiver 40 mark. Brian Thomas around wide receiver 50 still, but he's coming up a little out of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you've got Keon Coleman there in those 40 ranges as well. Given those values, is there a rookie receiver? They're so talented. It's such a fantastic rookie receiver class. But of those big five there that were taken early in the draft, is there one particular, when you bring in value there, that you're targeting more than the others?
So this is going to sound like a cop-out, but I have taken I have taken 4 of those 5 in every single draft I've done. Keon Coleman is the only receiver of that group that I am ignoring because I really like Dalton Kincaid and I can get Khalil Shakir as a dart throw late. So I'm eschewing Coleman, but depending on my roster makeup, I have taken Marvin Harrison because I have a home league and like people were like, for a rookie, that's too much. So he fell to me. Malik Neighbors, I think, is why I have him in my auction league because I couldn't believe people are like, oh, he's attached to Daniel Jones. Yes, he's attached to Daniel Jones, but he's excellent in contested situations. He looks like the real deal on tape. And he's going to draw like 125 targets. Like, yes, I don't care. I think that he can do it. I also really like Rome because not just because I'm a Bears fan, but because he has alpha written all over him. The chemistry that he and Caleb Williams have been developing since draft night has been very apparent. My mom, who still lives in Chicago, called me. In fact, I haven't said this to anyone. She called me yesterday. I was driving downtown to do a Sports Center hit, and she chewed me out because she has watched, obviously, all of Hard Knocks. And she told me, I'm going to do it in her accent, Lizzie, I think you are ignoring Rome and Caleb in your draft rankings. I don't see them. I don't know why they're higher. They are special. They are a dynamic duo. And so, Mom, I mean, she doesn't live in Australia. She lives in Chicago. But she very much chewed me out for not representing that duo. I do think that Keenan Allen, who I'm hearing a little bit of a foot tweak, by the way, but I do think Keenan Allen will probably start the season as Caleb Williams' second favorite target. But by midseason, I fully expect Odunze to leapfrog him in the depth chart, in the pecking order of targets. And finally, Brian Thomas, 4.3 speed.
Yeah.
He is going to fill that Calvin Ridley role. He's going to draw a ton of, I think Calvin Ridley drew over 130 looks last year. I think part of the reason that Brian Thomas Jr. is being devalued is because, people were disappointed that Trevor Lawrence didn't take the leap that everyone expected him to. And so now there's some like pendulum swing in the other direction. And unfortunately, or fortunately, if you are a value hunter, Brian Thomas Jr.'s ADP is being affected because of it.
I think from a role standpoint, stepping away from fantasy just for a sec, the Ridley out and Thomas in to that role, I think is actually going to work out well for both. Ridley looks good so far in Tennessee, running more of the things we remember during his heyday in Atlanta, a lot of those cross-field routes where he's able to use that amazing ability to separate and then create more separation with his speed. Seeing more of that in what the Titans are asking him to do, whereas that vertical outside receiver look, a little more static, but that fits what Brian Thomas can do so well. And I think something important to look at when you're looking at rookies for everyone out there watching is pay attention to the drumbeat. Brian Thomas didn't land in the start, their first practices down in Jacksonville, flying out the gates. Oh my God. Oh no, look, he's taken off, but he's built and he's built and he's built. We've seen it in preseason games. You're hearing the word from the people on the sideline, the beat reporters down there in Jacksonville. We were there as part of our training camp tour. You could see it was starting to build up. He was very measured. For someone that has 4.3 speed, you expect to see a blur. You could see he was putting attention into detail, into the steps that he was getting right through drills. The footwork was clean. But he was prioritizing that over look how fast I can do everything so quickly. So you're seeing that build up nicely. Love Brian Thomas Jr. there. One thing I will say, Rome Odunze in person looks he is an absolute cut out of it. He has alpha, as you said, alpha written all over him, 6'3", 200 plus pounds. Rare to see such a physically imposing rookie look like he must be like, a seasoned star vet. But that's the kind of figure that Rome cuts out there on the field. I will say though, not the biggest, most physically imposing rookie out of that draft class, because Torrey Taylor, Australia's own, punting with Chicago Bears at 6'4". That thing.
I was going to ask you about that.
That thing sounds like the biggest drum you've ever heard, getting walloped every time it comes off his boot. The crowd, there were big cheers from the crowd when Caleb, did Caleb things and spun out or delayed, waited for the pass rush to get oh so close and then hit a perfect teardrop to the corner to someone like DJ Moore or someone like Rome Odunze. But the other big oohs and ahs came from when Big Tory let that thing fly. We got to sit down with him. There's more of that coming this throughout this season as well. But yeah, we got a lot of love for your new Chicago Bears punter, Tory Taylor. Great guy and one hell of a leg on him. As we kick on forward, we've gone wide receivers. We talked a couple of running backs, but as we take a look, I mentioned one quarterback, a young quarterback there. Let's talk quarterback strategy here for a sec. We know there's those big names up the top, whether you're Josh Allen first, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Anthony Richardson in there. There's kind of those heralded names either because they're exceptionally potent dual threat or they're someone like Patrick Mahomes who we know what he can do with his legs when he wants to, but he's got 50-50 threat here. 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns could come at some point in the next season or two. We know those names. If you're not going with one of those top 5, 6, and are you looking in that kind of Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, Jordan Love, Kyler Murray kind of area? Or if you're at that point already, you're like, you know what? That's fine, but I'm going to just go for one of the, maybe you're going to take a rookie upside swing at someone like Caleb or someone like Jaden Daniels with his legs, or even one of these, someone that kind of gets tagged with game manager, but game manager in a super productive offense that still leads to fantasy gold, like a Brock Purdy, like a Tua, or perhaps Kirk Cousins for however many years he's in charge in Atlanta.
Weeks, not years. It's Kyler for me. This is not. I'm not thinking about this. Joe Burrow makes me a little bit nervous. Stefania Bell, my colleague, has talked about his wrist issue and how she thinks that, at least in the past, other similar injuries have led to cascading issues. Also, the Jamar Chase contract situation gives me a bit of pause. Dak, I understand, was the QB3 overall last year, but he was the anomaly because the man averaged just over 3 rushing attempts and just over 14 rushing yards per game. That was the QB 25 in terms of rush attempts per game and the QB 28 in terms of rushing yards. So yes, he did throw a ton. I don't really believe that miracles happen twice in a row, so I am staying away from Dak. To me, Kyler is a perfect bounce back candidate. He's now, a year and a half, 2 years, whatever, removed from the ACL tear in 2022 that upended that season for him. We know that he is a prolific rusher, and the Cardinals have done nothing but build around him from a pass-catching perspective. Marvin Harrison Jr., who we already obviously talked about, Trey McBride, they added Zay Jones. Now, there's a 5-game suspension, but fine. They've got Michael Wilson. They've got Greg Dortch, I think. And, Trey Benson, honestly, to support James Conner. So even if there is a Conner issue, there is talent behind him to buoy the running game and continue lifting this offense. So I think Kyler Murray is a fantastic bounce back candidate. I personally have him everywhere. He headlined my Facts versus Feelings debut, which went live on the .com just, 2 days ago. So Murray to me I moved him up to QB6, and he is currently still available in the 8th round of 12 team exercises.
Yeah, those names I mentioned there before we got into the rookies and kind of the late game managers on the higher powered offense, they are in that kind of 60 to 80 range in ADP. So as you mentioned around he's available, Kyler, often the last one coming off the board there. He's got the leg production. Look, no shots at Dak Prescott there. We know what he can do with his arm. When you look at the advanced metrics, he was very valuable as a rusher last year. That was because of situationally. When you look at things like EPA or success rate, he was a very smart rusher last year, Dak. But that wasn't because he was a prolific rusher and he was chewing up fantasy yardage and fantasy points on the ground. It was more because of the value when he decided that he was going to lower the prodigious shoulder. He does like to do that a little, Dak. But Cowboys fans and Cowboys media kind of know that if Dak gets an early run in a game, like a 5-yard carry for a first down conversion and bowls over a safety, like, oh no, Dak's going for 400 today. That's how he gets into the game. Dak just kind of likes to get a little dirt on the jersey, run over someone, and then he'll take off. But from a fantasy production, that hasn't been his calling card for quite some time. And hey, look, we know he's got his buddy there in the backfield taking red zone carries at the very least on paper with Ezekiel Elliott, even if I might be a bit more of a Rico Dowdle fan myself. All right. Actually, you know what? While we're on older running backs, we do have a question in here from Dylan, who wants to know Derrick Henry. New situation with the Baltimore Ravens. Reworked offensive line. Good things being heard about Roger Rosengarten at right tackle. Loved him coming out of Washington. Interior of the offensive line still getting itself worked out with Andrew Voorhees. You also got Aussie Daniel Faalele at 6 foot 1,000 playing guard, which should be interesting. Seems like he might get the starting nod, still to be sorted out there. But Derrick Henry, more likely league winner or league bust going into 2024? Where do you fall on that conundrum?
I think more likely a league winner. I think that obviously his efficiency has waned as his career has progressed. That's not like headline news. He landed in the best possible spot for his legacy and for fantasy. Ravens obviously led the league in rushing. Now, nearly 50% of those rushes obviously went to Lamar, but Lamar is not a goal line vulture. Gus Edwards would not have had the stat line he did if that were the case. So I do think that Derrick Henry is going to be really, really potent inside the 5. And, he's going to flirt with 20 rushing scores this year.
Love to hear it. I am back on with Derrick Henry. He was someone that I invested in early in his career, then bailed out probably at the wrong time and have been burnt ever since. And it's one of these concepts and a bit of an abstract one here, something we talked about. We had a little Fantasy 101 video go out that talked about, I shared some of the mistakes that I've made over the years and how people can correct. And one of those is fantasy isn't reality. If someone burns you, if a former loved one or flame burnt you in the past, in real life, I have absolute support in you deleting their number, moving on, and don't languish on that heartache. But in fantasy, you got to have a short memory, be a goldfish, get over the heartbreak because situations change and people can change. And Derrick Henry is one that I struggled with for a long time and paid the price of not reinvesting in the big Titans running back at the time. Now with Ravens, with the Ravens situation, I think it points all in the right direction there. We know that work ethic is never going to be an issue with Derrick Henry. The way that dude takes care of his body and his fitness in the offseason is absolutely ridiculous at 250 odd pounds. Okay. As I take a look through some of our fan questions, one more, while we are talking about running back situations, is there one, and again, this is a bit of an open-ended one, we've talked about a few, this is a question from Nick, is there an underrated running back situation or scenario, maybe it's a running back by committee that you think is going to fall one way, that you think is just flying under the radar? Is it someone like a Rico Dowdle with the Cowboys, with their rookies coming into that offensive line and actually looking pretty decent early? Tyler Guyton, Cooper Beebe taking over at left tackle and center respectively. Is there a spot out there that you think is just flying? The ADP doesn't really make sense. You mentioned Javonte Williams that could burst forth and really provide some nice value for those that perhaps employ the hero running back strategy that you mentioned earlier.
Well, I do think that Alvin Kamara is being wildly disrespected. Again, from a rushing standpoint, his efficiency has waned, right? That's not a surprise. That's what happens when people get older. We don't move as fast. Everyone, you and me, Laurie, we're probably in the same boat. But he has cleared an opportunity share of over 70% for 3 straight seasons. And there's no reason to believe it won't be a fourth because Kendre Miller can't stay on the field. Ask his head coach about it. Everyone seems real calm about it. Everyone's totally chill about Kendre Miller's unavailability.
Talk about getting over your feelings.
Woo! It's intense, right? But that only makes Kamara more valuable. And Jamal Williams, as delightful as he may be, if we're being honest, his skill set is too one note to threaten meaningful touches away from Alvin Kamara. So the offensive line is a disaster. Sure is. Is the offense kind of a mess? Yup. That's all kind of working in his favor. He is still the star. And I know you were just talking basically about what I call burnt takes, hashtag burnt takes and recency bias. And so people are like, he's not the same Alvin Kamara that he was, 3 years ago. Well, no, but he is a perennial top 12 producer and he's a running back and there aren't many of those and he's still available in the 4th, maybe 5th round.
It makes a ton of sense to me. And you hope, they did spend an early pick there, Talisi Fuanga, on that offensive line. You hope that adds a little starch there. Obviously, the Ramczyk saga over the offseason was not a fun one to follow for someone so talented that we just want, which could be healthy and boost up that offensive line. But Alvin Kamara, this is always going to be a pro Alvin Kamara channel, always going to be a pro Alvin Kamara show. So any love for the revered Saints veteran running back is always appreciated. Okay, now we're going to dive in. Look, we have, if at this point you aren't better at fantasy than you were when we started this chat, then I don't know what to tell you, because whilst I'm just giving you warning signs from my own past, Liz is spilling absolute gold, a unstoppable river of fantasy knowledge as you get ready for the biggest weekend of the season, and one that's going to define at least your fantasy happiness and perhaps 65% of your football happiness over the next few months. So as we dive in further, I just want to go over some must-haves, some 2024 must-haves. You mentioned the rookie receivers that you are absolutely committing to in so many drafts, 4 of the 5 that we mentioned there. But there are some must-have players, and it can be at any point in the round. It could be, you mentioned the fondness for Jonathan Taylor early in kind of round 1, round 2 areas. Is there someone that you are determined, auction league, salary cap league, however it's being phrased, snake draft, whatever it is there someone or a couple names that you are 100% coming out of that draft with? They are your guys for 2024.
Dalton Kincaid's got me down bad. I cannot avoid him. I mean, I intimated when talking about Keon Coleman how high I was on Kincaid. I mean, he was Josh Allen's second favorite target last year as a rookie. The Buffalo, and I don't want to hear all of this Dawson Knox talks. Yes, Dawson Knox is a fine player. Can we also realize that the Buffalo Bills traded up to get Dalton Kincaid as their move/flex option? Also, yes, when Knox came back towards the end of the season from injury, Kincaid's targets did go down. Wow, what a stunning turn of mathematical events. However, under Joe Brady, in that time period, those targets became more valuable because the average depth of target for Kincaid increased. So yes, his total number of targets with Dawson Knox on the field were reduced, but the value of them went up. And that was, from weeks 14 on. Also heading into this season, I mean, talk about bearing the lead, I'm doing it. No Stephon Diggs, no Gabe Davis. That's 240 targets vacated. So I want to be attached to who I believe will be Josh Allen's most looked to pass catcher in this offense. And I believe wholeheartedly that is Dalton Kincaid.
Dalton Kincaid projected coming out of college, coming out of Utah, in a school that absolutely puts high-end, pro-ready type of players out there, as someone that had the ability to take any target. One, could take off-target throws, which isn't something that we align to Josh Allen in this iteration of Josh Allen. His accuracy and his quality as a passer has improved, but he can take in the spectacular. He gets north-south and turns into a ball carrier really quickly, which is something that I'm sure we're only going to see him take advantage of and show off even more, as you mentioned, with those 6,000 targets that have been vacated out of the Buffalo Bills offense. If I'm throwing one out there, and please listen to Liz more than you do me when it comes to fantasy takes, but if I'm planting a couple flags out there, Brian Thomas Jr., who we mentioned earlier, is someone that really does speak to me in terms of the drumbeat he's built, the explosive potential there, and that we know what his quarterback situation is. It's very solidified. It's a very aggressive quarterback who likes to target the parts of the field and has the arm talent to target the parts of the field that Brian Thomas can succeed for you, particularly if you're in a point per first down league, or if you're in a non-PPR league. Those kind of Brian Thomas has that ability to win you matchups in a couple of catches and a couple of catches alone. We've seen in preseason. Go back, watch his LSU tape. I want to ask you about a tight end that I'm feeling a little more fond for this season than I have in years past. He was very productive last year, and it's on that same offense. And maybe it's a victim of, hey, we had a chat to him and now I'm falling for him. But Evan Ingram, incredibly productive, had a nice little preseason out. And preseason production doesn't equal regular season production, but we saw some nice red zone chemistry there with Trevor Lawrence as the Jags closed out their starters preseason campaign. Someone like Evan Ingram, who does slide a little in draft, I see him come off the board after the likes of Jake Ferguson quite often, after the likes of David Njoku, after the likes of even Dalton Schultz. I've seen in quite a few drafts. Where do you see someone like Evan Ingram, who has come on
after the likes of Dalton Schultz?
Listen, home leagues are crazy. It's the wild, wild west out there. But for someone like Ingram, how do you see? Do you see a repeat of what we saw in 2023, or do you see something coming back down to earth just a little bit? He's taken massive strides since becoming a Jaguar after dealing with whatever that was in New York.
Right. Well, I mean, didn't he catch something like 114 balls? Wasn't
correct?
He recorded over 100 receptions. So do I think he's going to manage triple-digit catches? No, because regression is obviously part of this game. However, I have him ranked in my top 6. I believe I have him as my tight end 6 just behind Kincaid. So in fact, in most drafts, Kincaid is going that I've been in. Kincaid is going after Ingram. So anyone who's like letting him fall past Dalton Schultz, I want to be in that league. That sounds like a great league. Can I get in that league?
You see, I'm trying to break my duck here. I'm trying to get some fantasy silverware back in the cabinet in a league where Dalton Schultz comes off the board ahead of someone like Evan Ingram. But he is one of those players. Again, we talk about getting over fantasy heartbreak. People associate that name with what happened in New York so clearly, despite what he's shown since becoming a Jacksonville Jaguar. Another name we talked about earlier, someone like that, is Javonte Williams. It hasn't been pretty the last couple of years as he came back from injury. But if you look at that, we got a question in, how are we seeing the Broncos offense this year, full of nothing, or are there some hidden gems? I personally don't expect this to be an air raid offense where Bo Nix is chucking it all over the paddock. I think this is going to be a whole lot of running. I think they're trying to get the offensive line right and trying to get some stability and some consistent production and lay a solid foundation there. I think Williams is someone that is going to get a chunk of carries. So he's another one of those players. But when you look at as we'll close out our fan questions, the last one, as you look at that Broncos offense, it's been a grind. It's been tough to watch for a long time. Outside of Javonte, is there anyone there, perhaps at the wide receiver spot, that you are willing to jump in on? Or are you kind of Javonte and maybe Jaleel McLaughlin a little later, and that's about it?
Well, I do like Jaleel. I'm glad you mentioned him again, because not only was he a bright spot in the Broncos offense last season, obviously good in space, solid pass catcher. It's a Joe Lombardi-led offense. And I made this take in June, and people were like, but what about Samaje Perine? And I was like, not buying it. Well, I'm okay at my job, I guess. So, but beyond that, if we're looking at the wide receivers, I do think Courtland Sutton has value. Again, when you look at the Broncos, the mantra that I want people to think is, and repeat to themselves, quietly, out loud, whatever it takes, production doesn't have to be pretty. There's still points. And Courtland Sutton is gonna draw probably 120 looks. Maybe he catches 70 balls, puts up, 850, 900 yards, gives you 5 touchdowns. That's still usable. Those are fantasy relevant statistic. But I think because everyone, now that the quarterback situation was confusing but not confusing, right? You've got Zach Wilson, you've got Jarrett Stidham, you've got Bo Nix, obviously. So it's not ideal. And I think immediately because of that, everyone just is off of the offense. Yet there can be productive pieces. And we talked about the Raiders at the top of the show, right? Another offense that's like, oh, this quarterback situation. And yet Devontae Adams is still going so early. You can get Devontae Adams light production out of Sutton rounds later. If we're talking about, the back half of this season's draft is full of these veterans who are going to flirt with, 850 to 1,100 yards, receiving yards. You're going to get 850 to 1,000 from a glut of these guys. Chris Godwin's another one. So yes, it doesn't have to be pretty. And even though much of what's under center is questionable, the volume is all going to be able to buoy, and volume remains king. Sutton's regular, consistent points.
Oh, pour one out for the cult favorite, or the fan favorite and cult hero Tim Patrick, who flashed nicely in his last preseason outing, wearing the 12 and getting peppered with slot targets. Immediately brought Marquez Colston to mind in a Saints offense, but that was clearly not the plans as Peyton sent him on his way, and now I believe is on the Detroit Lions practice squad. But this is why you're the consummate pro. You mentioned mantras, and that's where we're going to close this thing out, making the segues all too easy for me. Last year, we did talk about visualization, and we talked about really trying to manifest some fantasy success. Me personally, for everybody out there, is there a piece of advice or a mantra or something that you would like to share with the fantasy fans out there getting ready for their big day, whether it's this weekend or leading up to draft, leading up to the season opening kickoff in literally 1 week's time? It is now, we will be kicking off football in a week's time now. Is there something, a sage piece of wisdom you'd like to share as we wrap this thing up and send people on their way to hopefully productive fantasy drafts unless they're in one of my leagues?
Don't be shook. Don't let the plan that you have made for yourself be that which defines every single decision. it is going to go awry. The plan that you have, you will get sniped. And guess what? You will also, if you stay nimble and are not shook, receive gifts. So it's okay to stay messy. In fact, if you're not messy, then you're probably not feeling those butterflies in your stomach. And so while facts are essential to the process, it's the feelings that keep us coming back for more. So if you go in with a plan, do your research, take your cheat sheet, use the rankings. Please actually use the rankings. Go to the site, click on the site, use the rankings, and use them as a guide. And then when you don't get Dalton Kincaid in the 5th, just think how pleased you could be getting George Kittle in the 8th. Sometimes gifts will fall to you, but you have to stay open to them and not just focused on what didn't go your way.
Stay open, stay present, understand your strategy, be able to adapt when needed, and all things I could have remembered at my draft last year where, look, we enjoy these nights, especially if you're in person and you're around friends, but look, don't get carried away in the celebration of your buddy turning up for his first night out since having a little one, and then realize that you've drafted 4 running backs before a wide receiver, even though you came in with the plan that you were going to go hero running back. It will not end in a fantasy drought-breaking championship. That's the only advice I have to pass on. Liz, thank you so much for giving us some time today. It's a hell of a weekend coming up. You are insanely busy at the moment, just helping the fantasy masses out there. As well as I know our ESPN colleagues that are tuned in at all times. And I know I read your Fact or Feeling article the other day to get my mindset right. So thank you so much for giving us some time. Everybody out there, you have to be following Liz Loza on every single social platform that absolutely exists out there. It is nothing but a pathway and a roadmap to fantasy success following on. So Liz, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Laurie. It's a pleasure being here as always.
All right, guys, we will be back next week. Phil Murphy will be back in the chair. He is currently, I believe, getting rid of his preseason stubble. We'll see where he's up to with that. But we've got more NFL Brekkie Show coming your way. Back again for week 0 and all the way through the Super Bowl, where I doubt my Dallas Cowboys will be playing, but we know that you will be coursing through the season with your own fandom back there. It's great to be back. Stay tuned to espn.com.au for all your NFL and sporting needs. Check out the ESPN Australia YouTube channel where there's a ton of NFL and other content across our ESPN Australia New Zealand socials, and we will